Our speaker this morning is Dr. Allan Goodman, and he will be discussing the critical need for higher international education in the search for world peace. Dr. Goodman is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of International Education, which marked its centennial in 2019. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Goodman has a PhD in government from Harvard, an MPA from the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and a BS from Northwestern University. Before joining IIE, Dr. Goodman was Executive Dean of the School of Foreign Service and professor at Georgetown University. His books on international relations are published by Princeton, Harvard, and Yale Presses, and he has served at the Department of State and the Central Intelligence Agency. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Goodman.
So Herb, I have a question. What if I don't play golf? My job really is to work for Ian Stoddard, who heads the Fulbright Commission in Belgium and Luxembourg. I'll explain why it's a privilege for us to be working together, but someday I hope you'll invite her to speak, because I don't know anybody more innovative, energetic, and adding more to the Fulbright program than she does every day. She's also the only commission director that came home for Christmas at the beginning of the pandemic, and then spent 2.5 years here before she was allowed to get back on an airplane. It's a kind of unusual trajectory. I've also figured out the solution to what day of the week it is. Ever since the pandemic started, I said to my staff, every day is Monday. Feels like every day is Monday. Feels like Monday every day. And nobody gets confused as a Tuesday or Thursday or Wednesday. We're sort of coming out of that period, but still I feel every day is Monday and better to go by the numbers. So. IIE, which I have the privilege to serve, is probably the most famous organization you've never heard of. We're not as well known in America as we are around the world, certainly known better in Belgium than we are here. There are 108 Nobel Prize winners associated with the Institute of International Education. The only other institution in the world that has more is Harvard University. We're the second oldest educational exchange organization devoted to international education in the world. The first oldest is the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. They were founded in 1534. And having taught at a Jesuit university for 20 years, if you want a repository of Pope jokes, I'm happy to contribute to your new committee. The only thing that was true at my time in Georgetown was the absolute certainty that there will never be a Jesuit Pope. So miracles do happen and life changes. Every day in the media, newspapers, social media, our name appears. You've never heard of us, I know. But we do an annual census of the flow of students to and from America. We started doing that census in 1920, so we have 103 years of data on how many students come here, how many Americans go abroad, what do they study, when do they return. And newspapers, television, radio, always needs a factoid. It seems like every other day about how open America is to the world and how fortunate we are to have international students coming here. And our founders created us in 1919, believing that if people studied in each other's countries, so it's right after the First World War, they had this belief if we studied in each other's countries, we would be less likely to prefer war as a way of solving our problems. It's still a work in progress, but it's still the best investment and contribution Erica and I can make to making the world a less dangerous place. And we don't have to, it's not like curing cancer. We don't have to invent something new. We know that educational exchange works. We know that people want to come to study in America, and we're better off for sending our kids abroad to see the world and have people in other countries see us. We're also, on the occasion of our centennial in 2019, PBS made a documentary about us. I think it's still available on PBS, probably also on YouTube. They had a series called The Treasures of New York City. And in our year, 2019, in 2019, they featured 4 or 5 other organizations, Delmonico's Steakhouse, Coney Island, Lincoln Center, MoMA, and the US Open Tennis Championship at Forest Hills. So we were glad to be part of that company. It allowed us to tell our story and to think back on what it means for the city of New York to have birthed an organization like us. And I don't have to wear my sunglasses now, so. We do 3 pretty unique things, and we've done them for all the years of our history. The first is we administer scholarship and exchange programs like Fulbright. And we've done Fulbright since it was founded in 1946, so it's a long run for one agency to be administering. We do this on behalf of the Department of State, 49 Fulbright commissions around the world, of which Belgium and Luxembourg is one, and 120 US embassies where there are no Fulbright commissions. We work with those embassies, so probably 170 countries at any given time are participating in Fulbright. None of the other scholarships in the world are like Fulbright because we're global. And it's also binational. We send Americans to a country and we get people from that country to come here. If Fulbright were not binational and not global, most of the foreign students. So what makes Fulbright unique is it's global, but also its binational nature. It's also a way, if we left Americans to their own devices, they would study abroad, not in great numbers. And 90% of them would go to England, Ireland, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Fulbright is the way the rest of the world gets to meet Americans and realizes that we all have common interests. We care for our kids, we care for their education, we hope education will lead to a job, and we'd like to do everything we can to avoid war. A few years ago, we had an ingathering of Fulbright students at one of the host universities, and I've never forgotten it clearly because we went around the room. There were about maybe 18 Fulbrighters from everywhere: India, Pakistan, China, Brazil, Nigeria. Just picture the United Nations. And the host said, we'd like to go around the room, and would each of you stand up and describe your country and what makes your country different? And everybody complied except for the last student. They got up, they said, I'm from France, I'm from Germany, I'm from China, different than America because we want this for our people and we want that for our education. The last student to get up was from Pakistan. And people came in national dress. So he had this long kameez on, spoke English flawlessly with Indian Pakistani accent. And he said, I've listened to all the presentations and I realized that there is no difference between us. You all mentioned education, you all mentioned safety, you all mentioned respecting the rights of women, you all mentioned the desire to excel in your field. He was studying to be an astronaut. Ended up being the first Pakistani astronaut because the University of Colorado, which was our host, has an excellent training program and graduate degree in astronautics for future astronauts. But I never forgot what he said because what we're about is realizing all the things we have in common, from education to the future, to the environment, to making the world a less dangerous place. But it took somebody from another country to tell everybody else and us Americans that we share these things in common. Fulbright began as an appropriation, began actually in the wake of World War II. I think people here will remember that we had something called the Lend-Lease Act. Senator Fulbright was the junior senator from Arkansas. He had a Rhodes Scholarship, and he wanted to have the Rhodes experience created for more Americans. Rhodes was very small then, still small now. And he wanted to have more people from other countries experience us. So Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, all these countries owed us tremendous amounts of debt for the Lend-Lease material, which we loaned them to fight the war. And the way things work in Congress then, and the way things work now, if you're the last person in the room, and it's around 2 o'clock in the morning, they hand you the bill, you read it, and if you want to make a change in it, you do. So he changed the word debt to educational fund, or something like that. Nobody knew about it for about 12 hours, but he wiped out the Lend-Lease debt of bazillions of dollars and said, keep the money there, keep it in your countries, create an education fund that sends your people here and welcomes Americans coming to your country. There was so much debt owed us from that war. Fulbright did this midnight, 1946. Congress didn't need to appropriate any more money until 1961. And now it's an annual appropriation by Congress. It has strong bipartisan support. We try to visit the 85 members of the appropriations committees in the Senate and the House. We try to visit all 85. This year we got to 70. And we start with the most conservative Republicans, the most conservative new members of Congress, Senate and House. And you go into these meetings and you expect that they're going to tell you what's wrong with Fulbright. And to our great delight, the most conservative members say, we know the program well. It's 75, 76 years old. It's time tested. I'm glad America is doing this. And we're going to have to show some bipartisanship this year and next year. And we hope that the Fulbright appropriation will be one demonstration. Thank you, Carol. Being in a church, I was reminded of being driven by a taxi driver outside of Boston a couple of years ago. And she said, so what do you do, young fellow? Taxi drivers in Boston get to know you very well, very quickly. Tried to explain this educational thing, and we send people abroad. And she's looking at me in the rear mirror. I'm looking at her. I said, we also bring many foreign students and scholars to America. The U.S. government pays, and we help make the taxpayers' money well spent. I'm looking at her face in the rearview mirror. She's looking at mine, and I expected to be the cab would stop. She would be let me out because she didn't want to spend money on foreign students. And she said, you know, that's a really great idea. At my choir at church, we host students from France every year. None of us have been to France. But we get to know the students. They come and stay at our house. They get to know us. They sing beautifully. And I said, well, we have students from France. And she said, I hope you have them for the rest of the world. So the kind of work that Erica and I do, every day we're going to meet somebody you think is going to be opposed to doing this. But that's why we have strong bipartisan support. And that's why the Congress has supported it in good times and bad for so long. So one unique thing we do is the Fulbright program. It's also unique because 100 other governments contribute money to it. The Congress appropriation is $287.5 million this year. It funds about 9,000 grants, half for foreign students and scholars coming here, half for Americans going abroad. But 100 other governments, including Belgium and Luxembourg, also contribute to Fulbright, more than $100 million. So it's the only federal program we have found where so many other governments contribute something that was made in America, invented in America, is an American brand. And as you go around the world, you never meet a person that says, I don't want your Fulbright because I don't like your president, I don't like your policy, you don't like what the United States is doing. It is something that unites us almost instantly. About half the cabinets of countries we have difficulties with have alumni of State Department programs, whether it's Fulbright or the visitor program. And it makes a huge difference when you go to negotiate a difficult issue with a difficult country or government. When they say, you know, my nephew was a Fulbright, or my niece went to school in California, or in Idaho, or in Montana, and we have a lot of Fulbrights here in New Jersey, and not just at Princeton. So it is an instant public diplomacy investment and bond that lasts a lifetime and sometimes generations. And that's what really makes this so special for us as a privilege to administer it, and for Erica and me to work in the field to make sure we get the best applicants, the most inclusive applicants possible. The second thing we do pretty uniquely is respond to students when they're stranded in emergencies. We did the first rescue of students stranded actually in 1920, founded in 1919. Within 6 months, there was a Bolshevik revolution. And there were a ton of Russian students stranded in Europe and America who suddenly had no source of support. And we passed the plate, made it possible for them to continue first a month, then 2 months, then finish their education. So at least they had an education before they either resettled in another country or went back to Russia. The bad news is we've been doing that every year since 1920. There's been a civil war, there's been an earthquake, there's been a tsunami, there's been a dictatorial regime that comes to power, and students are stranded here in America. And we know who they are and where they are and what they're studying because we do a census every year, starting in 1920, of who's here. So when an earthquake happens in Turkey or in Japan, we know how many foreign students from those countries are here. And we know how many will be cut off from sources of funds back home because the banks are closed, there's an earthquake, there's a disaster, there's a war. The business, I'm sorry to say, is booming in that dimension, partly because when I started 20 years ago, there would be one flood a year, one earthquake a year, one war a year, civil war. And we'd go out to schools and say, do you have any students from Nepal or Haiti or wherever the place was? And they'd say yes, and we'd work out ways to help them finish the semester and their degree. We had 12 calls in the past 12 months to help students that are stranded because of war, earthquakes, disasters, regime change. And it's every place you read about in the paper: Ethiopia, Burma, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Turkey because of the earthquake. And we've never had a period like this where almost every month, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, the collapse of the currency, almost every month there is a need to respond to international students who are here. And we in the university share a duty of care to help those. Not everybody is here that needs money. Not everybody is here comes from the region where the earthquake or the war is being fought. But this census allows us to know who's here, what they're studying, and how many we have to get ready to help if there's a disaster. And I don't foresee that business going away. So that's one type of student scholarship. that we have that's very unique because it focuses just on the foreign students that are here. There are just about 1 million foreign students here. So it is a very big number to begin with. They're in every state, 50 states in the District of Columbia. They go to big schools, small schools, Ivy League schools, public institutions. The great thing about America is we have so many institutions. And the foreign students are increasingly finding that we have more than 2 universities, one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one at Stanford, California. And that's what's got to happen with America. In fact, next year, we'll probably again record that there are over 1 million international students in the United States. That's a big number. They bring about $42 billion with them because most pay tuition, they pay room and board, they patronize local communities. But the bigger story in my lifetime and yours is in the next couple of years, we're going to have 2 million international students. First, we got Rome. We have 2 million fewer Americans going to higher ed this year. And by 2025, just because of the demographic cliff, we will have fewer and fewer and fewer young people in the 18 to 24 year age cohort. And so we need to get ready for not just 1 million, but double that number. But also for a second reason. There are 10 countries in the world that account for 80% of international students, hosting 80% of the world's international students. China, Germany, France, UK, Italy, Spain, Japan, Russia, the usual Australia that you think of. The problem is that most of them are out of room. The enrollment of foreign students in most of those countries are north of 20%. Here it's south of about 5%. Some are approaching 30%, Canada, the UK. UK has 200 plus universities. We have 4,000. Canada has 65 or 85. We have 4,000. We have room. We have space to grow, and we don't have to build new campuses. We don't have to build new faculty. They're all here. They were teaching 2 million more students 4 years ago. And so we're probably the only country left on earth that has room to deal with this surge that I predict with international students. And again, we don't have to figure out how to do it. We know how to do it. We know how to do it at scale. We already do nearly 1 million. And routinely, we've been doing 1 million for the past couple of years before the pandemic. The other thing we work at that's very unique is refugee scholarships. And we discovered it partly through our work with Fulbright, and partly I helped to chair the Rhodes Scholarship for the Middle East. And I noticed in selecting the Rhodes Scholars over 10 years, 2 things. One, the Middle East has a lot of refugees. Never picked. Well, to be a Rhodes Scholar, you have to have a passport. You have to be able to get from where you are to Oxford University. You have to get a visa sometimes from your home country, an exit permit. We have 114 million refugees today. That number has tripled in 3 years. We think that a minimum of 250,000 college-ready and graduate school-ready students are in those camps. And 10 years ago, nobody thought there were students in the camps. So in addition to the surge of international students, we felt we needed to do something to prevent a lost generation among refugees who are going to be spending 18 to 20 years in the camps that now exist. And we also realized that we couldn't do it through standard programs because refugees can't travel, they don't have passports. And there's a risk that somebody gets out of a camp and they'll never be able to go back. not because they don't have the will, but because the regulations of the local government says once you leave, we don't want to acknowledge that you have a right to return to your camp. So the Odyssey scholarships are our version, the 21st century version of the Rhodes scholarships, just for refugees. It operates all around the world, and we don't require you to have papers or a passport. We find, because of our network with universities around the world, we find places near your camp or in the country that you're forced to locate to that will take you in. You might expect we get thousands and thousands and thousands of applications, and we do. Initially, I have to tell you, we did a pilot program in Jordan for Iraqi and Syrian refugees, and I was a little apprehensive. Some of them had been out of school 6 or 7 years, got married, had a family. Some people in the academy said, well, if you're out of school that long, you're really out of practice. If you're 30 years old, you really can't go back to school. And the first group we had about 15. We also worried about the guilt complex. So how come I get the scholarship and continue and reconnect with my education? What about all the others that can't? We all know refugees. Many of our families were refugees. We all know that they strive and they thrive. And boy, their records are terrific. If they had PTSD, they got over it. If they were in one subject and knew 6 or 7 years later that it'd be better to study another, they had no problem switching to the field that was most relevant for them. We've had nothing but terrific performance and success by reconnecting the refugees of the world to higher education. And I think this is going to be a problem with us for a very long time. The estimate of the number of refugees a decade or two from now is not 114 million. It's over 200 million. We don't see any sign of conflicts being fought a different way that don't cause people to have to flee. And with them, more and more are university ready. And somehow there needs to be a way to deal with that. So we have a campaign at 25,000 universities in the world. It's a simple campaign. Everyone take one, or 2, or 3. And the Odyssey program is testing that proposition and how it works. And we are discovering that all around the world, near where the refugees are, there are institutions of higher education ready to open their doors. So that's the second really unique thing about the work we do. The third is that we rescue scholars. Rescued our first scholar professor in 1920. Ironically, it was because of the Russian Revolution. They were stranded in Europe. Europeans didn't want them, and we found ways to bring them to America. They won Nobel Prizes, they invented cures for diseases, they registered patents, and they taught our kids math and science. We've been doing that, unfortunately, pretty much every year since 1920. We have a small endowment that allows us to rescue around 65, 70 professors every year. You could be a professor of anything. You can come from any place. You can be under threat for any reason. Your religion, your discipline, your family name. We're completely apolitical when it comes to that. We just want to save knowledge and save lives. Last year, we rescued 221. Way beyond what we had plans to do, because you had Russia, Ukraine, but also continuing war in Ethiopia, Burma, and places you read about every day in the newspaper. That was the busiest year we had in all the other years we've been doing it. Busier than during the Nazis, busier than during the Cold War, busier than during the Cultural Revolution. And it's everywhere. In the old days, it was sort of easy for us to do this rescue work in a sense because it was Europe, it was Germany, it was the Nazis, or it was the Soviet Union. Today, at the end of this month, we have almost every other month, a selection committee meeting to pick the scholars we can help this month. We have 15 cases from 12 countries. It's not all Afghanistan, it's not all Ukraine, it's not all Russia. It's all over the world. Iran, China, Syria, Turkey, Venezuela, South Africa. So it's a global problem. It's never gone away for us. And so part of our DNA and our mission is to continue to rescue scholars. I have the privilege, it's a 2-year fellowship. I have the privilege of reading with another committee member the renewal applications. We probably renew about 100 a year. And I'm thinking, what if I were a rescued scholar? I had to flee. I didn't want to flee. Then I had to flee because it was so dangerous, and there were 2 attacks in my life. I have 6 family members with me. Not all of them have papers. Many of them don't speak the language where we're going to be placed. We place about 1/3 in America, about 2/3 around the rest of the world. We try to keep them close to the countries they're fleeing because things change. Wars do end. Terrorists get captured. Regimes change. So I'm thinking myself, I'm this scholar. I've landed in Germany, France, Egypt, Florida, you name it. I'm at a university. I have 6 kids. 2 have severe illnesses, chronic illnesses. 1 needs dental work, 1 has PTSD, and my spouse doesn't speak the language of the country that I'm in. I would spend those 12 months worrying about all of that and saying, well, I can't teach, I can't do this, I can't do that, because I'm so worried about, and I have elderly parents back home in the country I had to flee. So these applications for renewal sort of begin with, I finished 2 books, I started another, I registered a patent, I taught 3 courses of chemistry, supervised 2 PhD dissertations, did an online course for my students back home. These are people who are in the full of their life. And the moment they have a place of safe haven, the life returns, the academic life returns. Yes, a few, I'm sure, are worried about what next and when they might ever go back. But with these scholars, we're fortunate to find the people who are committed to their work, committed to teaching, and are able to do that in so many different contexts. So we will continue to do that work on a global basis, more challenging than ever before. And finally, we're committed to each decade to get 10,000 passports for American students to study abroad. Now, how many here have a passport? And you can smile as you raise your hand. That's not like America. 38% of Americans have passports. Half of them are over 60. Less than 3% of Americans study abroad. We don't think that in college today, 5%, 6% of Americans have passports. And certainly students of limited means, many we meet have never traveled outside their state, never taken an air flight. So we have a program every year to fund 1,000 of them getting passports. Costs about $200 all in. But for us, it's the 21st century driving license. All those students have driving licenses. But the thought that you have a passport is so alien to most American college students that we felt we needed some intervention. Everybody here knows young people that have passports. We know thousands who do not. And so the first step is getting a passport. And when they have it, they then say, well, I wonder where I should study abroad. And that's where we help. That's where Erica's commission helps. That's what higher education is good at. But it's too late to get a passport in your junior year because your mom can't find the birth certificate, you don't have time to go to the post office, you took the wrong photograph. Many colleges now, because the photographic requirements are so precise, have passport offices to fill this stuff out for you. But they don't have enough customers because it's not part of what Americans think they ought to do in studying abroad. Finally, it's a requirement of this group to inject humor in any speech. I want to commend to you a 4-minute video. I don't have it here, of the Jimmy Fallon late night show on, can you name that country? And it's a map of the world with the country borders drawn, but no names. And it's a microphone and passersby on the street. Can you name any country? And they give the person in the street a pointer, and the first couple of pointers said, yeah, that's Africa. No, can you name any country in Africa? Pointer goes to North Africa, to Egypt. Ah, that must be South Africa. No, maybe it's down here. Can you name any country? Yes. Pointer goes to Russia. That must be the United States because it's the largest thing on the map. Another person is, oh yeah, that's South America. Can you name any country? No, I should have learned that in high school. The person on the street says, right. Then a kid comes along and can you name any country? And he nails it. One by one, he goes continent by continent. And that's really the problem we're dealing with. Most Americans can't find Ukraine on a map. We couldn't find Afghanistan on a map. We have no idea where Iran is on a map. Israel's too small to be on a map, so nobody finds Israel. And we need to be tackling for our next generation a way to get them in touch with the world. And we think getting them a driving license called a passport is a darn good start. Thank you very much, Ian, for having me. And I'm certainly happy to try to answer any questions you might have. And I think we're going to get moderated help up here.
We will take questions and you must come up here to speak so that the people on Zoom can hear you.
No, you have to pass a geography test for me to answer.
Thank you. I didn't know what the Fulbright scholarship did. It was very interesting, but my question is more of a comment. You said you get 285 million from Congress. If I'm not mistaken, that's the price of a jet, military jet. And I think you guys do probably a lot more with that than they do with the jet. Thank you.
I'm sure Erica and I completely agree with you. But we're lucky to get that money, given all the demands there are on the federal budget. And I think that you get with 285 million, you get one engine and half of a fuselage.
Thank you. Every week we have a presenter and every week we learn something we had no earthly idea. And today's no exception. So in America, a lot of kids apply for college and a bazillion of them apply to Harvard and so forth. And there's all these selection criteria. And we debate a lot as a society about, what's more important as a criterion and who's going to make the best student. And we get it right sometimes, we miss sometimes, but it's really a difficult process to place students in America. Here you are with 180 other countries with huge differences in social. You got kids that are in these refugee camps that have no academic record. They have, you can't get them to take an SAT. How do you guys do that? And you know, I mean, I realize you probably miss every once in a while, but it's beyond my ken how you guys can sort out all of these applicants from so many different cultures and, you know, some countries have a 100-point scale, some have a pass, I don't know. Anyway, you got the general idea.
It's Mitch, it's a terrific question. And there's no easy answer to it, except we've been doing this for 100 years. And we've been working with foreign students from 1919, 1920. In fact, we were hired originally by the State Department to interpret foreign transcripts because they are very different. We've developed an expertise in reading applications. Tests are part of it, but not everything. I used to run admissions for the graduate program at Georgetown. And I thought that was a hard job. We would admit 100 students, so we have about 3,000-4,000 applications for this particular program. I can't imagine doing the admissions work today. Tens of thousands of applications, American, foreign, and there is a science to it, but there really is no science at the end. The thing that makes us, the enterprise of higher ed, successful, though, is not the picking process. It's the universities that have a duty of care to the students, the faculty that have a duty to teach them, the extra counseling that you can pretty much tell in the first week or two who's going to need help with English, whether they're an American student or a foreign student, who's having trouble managing their executive function, studying, getting up in time, showing up in class. And our higher ed system has been working at that problem ever since World War II. And so we know how to recognize the signs. We know how to remediate the signs. We couldn't do it if we were Europe, where you basically show up in Europe, you go into a school, you barely see your professor. Nobody says, gee, I wonder why you missed class, or says, gee, the essay is kind of weak. You ought to go see this counseling center to get work on your language skills. So it really is a tribute to the American higher ed system that makes it possible for us to take so many from different walks of life.
Thank you for the presentation. One comment and one question. 1919 was also the year that Georgetown School of Foreign Service was established. And the question is, are the results from the annual census available online that is performed by
Yes.
IE?
Yes. So look at iie.org, the website, and it'll pop up. Or just Google Open Doors, which is the trade name of the annual census. The next one's coming out November 15. It will show we're out of the pandemic in terms of the pandemic's effect on international student mobility. We'll have some very interesting new results. But November 15 will be the next one that comes out. But all the other ones are online. Life is funny with connections. When I was dean at Georgetown, we installed this magnificent fluidized coal bed. It reduced carbon. It reduced our demand on the public utility by 30%. There was never a whiff of smoke or pollutants. And part of my job was to take delegations to visit it because it was a demonstration. It was funded by the federal government. Georgetown was the perfect place, and we had terrific lobbyists who made sure it was funded by the federal government. I didn't know that that was what Ian was doing in Washington all those years. But it was his fluidized coal bed. He invented it. He installed it, and he took delegations or asked us to arrange delegations to come see it. Georgetown Foreign Service School, also 1919, was a wonderful invention. except for one problem. The anchor of the curriculum was to teach diplomatic history. They didn't have a professor of diplomatic history at Georgetown or in Washington, D.C. So the first professor of diplomatic history was IIE's first president, who was a professor of diplomatic history at the City College of New York. And he would leave by train on Tuesday night, go to Washington, lecture on Wednesday, part of Thursday, and then come back. And I think we shared the IIE presidency with Georgetown for about 10 years until they found a professor of diplomatic history. So it is the connections in this world only grow smaller and more. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I'm specifically interested in the actions that you've had with the smaller nations of Europe, the Baltic nations. And specifically, I'm from Estonia. How are the Estonian students? Are they involved with your programs?
When you mentioned the smaller nations of Europe, I was thinking of Luxembourg and America and Belgium, but we've had terrific expansion with the Baltic countries, terrific interest, also all throughout Southeastern Europe. The fall of the Soviet Union helped a great deal because academic freedom began to exist in so many places that it didn't. So we get plenty of applications. And what's encouraging to me, we've lived through some pretty unpopular times with many countries disagreeing with our policies and our actions, whether it's Iraq or our domestic policies. But nobody says, I don't want to come here because they want the Fulbright. People want to have the experience of an American higher ed. They want a degree that says made in America. It's the best thing our country has going for it. But it starts with Fulbright, because if we were like the British or the French or the Germans, we would have focused only on former colonies. And the flow of international students to those countries is still focused on mainly where they had colonies. Fulbright made America focus on the world and said to the world, we have open doors in higher ed and we welcome your students. And it's worked ever since.
Thank you, Allan, for a wonderful presentation. We're so fortunate to have you with us. And we're blessed as a country to have so many institutions of higher learning where students from outside the U.S. can come to understand us better, and where our students can go abroad to become ambassadors for the United States. Yeah, it's a wonderful asset to have, and we thank you for all of the work that you do on behalf of the country. We have two ways of thanking you, Allan, for your presentation. One is a certificate of appreciation from the old guard.
John signed it.
And John signed it. That's right. And the other
It's a
one,
diploma I didn't have to pass the test for, right?
and the other way, perhaps even better, is the old guard salute.